The history books call it the Industrial Revolution, a time of progress and prosperity, but they don't tell you about the factory workers who made it possible. They don't mention the families who paid the ultimate price for England's economic miracle. Tonight, let's uncover what life was really like for the people who built the modern world. Hey there, and welcome back to another journey through history. If you're new here, I'm your guide through the forgotten stories that shaped our world. Before we dive in, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And I'm always curious where you're all listening from. So drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It never ceases to amaze me how we're all connected across the globe through these stories. Now find that comfortable spot, maybe dim the lights, and let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're traveling back to 1825 England, to the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and trust me, by the time we're done, you'll be incredibly grateful for that soft bed beneath you. Congratulations, you've just awakened in Manchester, England in the year 1825, but this isn't the gentle awakening you're used to. There's no gradual stirring, no snooze button, no peaceful morning light filtering through clean windows. Instead, you're jolted awake by the deafening clang of the factory bell echoing through the narrow, soot-covered streets. It's 4:30 in the morning, and your workday is about to begin. The room around you is barely larger than a modern walk-in closet. You share this cramped space with your spouse and 3 children, all sleeping on straw mattresses laid directly on the wooden floor. The straw is old and musty, compressed from months of use until it provides little more cushioning than the bare boards beneath. Your pillow is a rolled-up coat, and your blanket is a thin piece of wool that's been patched so many times it's more repair than original fabric. The air is thick and heavy, tinged with the smell of coal smoke that seeps through every crack in the building, even indoors. You can taste the industrial fumes that have become as much a part of Manchester's atmosphere as oxygen itself. The walls around you are damp from condensation, creating dark stains that spread like bruises across the peeling wallpaper. In the corners, mold grows in patches that no amount of scrubbing can remove. Your youngest child, barely 3 years old, coughs in her sleep, a dry, persistent sound that's become as familiar as her breathing. All the children in your neighborhood have that cough. It's the sound of cotton dust and coal smoke doing their slow work on developing lungs. The factory doctor says it's nothing to worry about, that children adapt to industrial air better than adults. But you've noticed how the older children in the tenement wheeze when they climb the stairs, how they struggle to catch their breath after even mild exertion. Your breakfast, if you can call it that, consists of a small piece of bread, yesterday's bread, hard and beginning to mold around the edges, and a cup of tea so weak it's barely colored the water. The bread costs nearly a quarter of your daily wages. But you need something in your stomach for the long day ahead. You save the crust for the children, knowing they'll need every scrap of nutrition they can get. The tea is mostly hot water, flavored with leaves that have been used and reused, until they provide little more than the illusion of refreshment. Your spouse is already awake, quietly preparing the children's meager breakfast. There's no conversation at this hour. You've both learned that preserving energy is more important than morning pleasantries. Besides, what is there to say? Another day of survival lies ahead, identical to yesterday and tomorrow. The routine has become so ingrained that you move through these morning preparations like sleepwalkers. Your body's performing familiar tasks while your minds try to prepare for another 16 hours of industrial labor. The children watch with hungry eyes as you eat, knowing their meal will be even smaller than yours. Your eldest, a boy of 8, will come with you to the factory today. He's old enough now to work as a scavenger, crawling under the machines to collect cotton waste and oil the moving parts. The thought fills you with a mixture of pride and dread. Pride that he's old enough to contribute to the family's survival. Dread at what the factory will do to his small body over the coming years. The walk to the factory takes you through streets that would horrify any modern city planner. Open sewers run alongside the cobblestones, carrying a mixture of human waste and chemical runoff from the textile mills. The smell is overwhelming, a combination of raw sewage, rotting organic matter, and the sharp, acrid scent of industrial chemicals. Your lungs, already compromised from months of breathing factory air, struggle with each breath. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with a film of industrial residue mixed with moisture from the perpetual fog that hangs over the city. In places, the stones have been eaten away by acid runoff from the factories, creating treacherous holes that can catch an unwary foot and cause a twisted ankle or worse. You've learned to watch your step carefully, knowing that any injury could mean lost wages that your family simply cannot afford. The buildings tower above you, blocking out most of the natural light. These aren't the orderly structures of modern urban planning, but a chaotic jumble of tenements, factories, and commercial buildings thrown up as quickly and cheaply as possible to house the growing industrial population. Many lean against each other for support, their foundations undermined by the constant vibrations from nearby machinery. But even when the sun does break through, it's filtered through a permanent haze of coal smoke and industrial pollution. The sky isn't blue here, it's a perpetual gray-brown, like looking through dirty glass on particularly bad days. The smoke is so thick that streetlights must be lit even at midday. Rain, when it comes, doesn't clean the streets. Instead, it turns the coal dust and soot into a black, oily sludge that sticks to everything it touches. Other workers shuffle alongside you, their faces bearing the same expression of weary resignation that you've come to recognize in your own reflection. These are people who've aged decades in just a few years of factory work. Men in their 30s look 50, their hair prematurely gray, their backs permanently bent from hunching over machinery for 16 hours a day. Women your age appear elderly, their skin sallow and their eyes hollowed by exhaustion and poor nutrition. You recognize most of these faces, the tight-knit community that poverty creates. There's Mary, whose husband died in a factory accident last year. Now supporting 3 children on a woman's wages, her eldest daughter, barely 12, walks beside her with the resigned expression of someone who's already seen too much of life's harshness. Behind them comes Thomas, a man your age who lost 2 fingers to a spinning machine but continues working because there's no alternative. His hand is wrapped in dirty cloth, the wound never properly healed because he couldn't afford to take time off for recovery. Children as young as 6 walk beside their parents, heading to their own jobs in the mills. These aren't the rosy-cheeked, energetic children you might expect. Factory work has stunted their growth and stolen their childhood. Many are missing fingers from accidents with machinery. Others walk with limps from injuries that healed poorly without proper medical care. Their clothes are patched and repatched, handed down through multiple families until they're more patch than original fabric. The children don't play as you walk. There's no energy for games. No time for childhood activities. Instead, they save their strength for the day ahead, knowing that a moment's inattention at their work could result in serious injury or death. They've learned to move with the careful precision of adults, their small bodies already adapted to the demands of industrial labor. As you approach the massive brick factory building, the noise becomes overwhelming. The constant clatter of machinery creates a din that penetrates your bones. Steam hisses from multiple sources, creating clouds of hot, humid air that make breathing even more difficult. The building itself seems to pulse with mechanical energy, vibrating slightly with the rhythm of hundreds of spinning machines operating at full capacity. The factory looms before you like a medieval fortress, its walls blackened with soot and its windows so grimy that little light penetrates from outside. Smokestacks stretch into the sky like giant fingers, belching forth clouds of toxic smoke that spread across the city like a plague. The building's architecture is purely functional, no ornamentation, no consideration for human comfort or aesthetic appeal. This is a machine for making money, and every aspect of its design reflects that single purpose. The factory entrance is a narrow doorway barely wide enough for 2 people to pass through at once. This bottleneck is intentional. It allows the overseers to count workers as they enter and ensures no one can slip away unnoticed during the shift. A burly man with a pocket watch stands beside the door, noting the arrival time of each worker. His face is impassive, showing no recognition of the workers as human beings. To him, you're simply units of production, interchangeable parts in the industrial machine. Anyone arriving even minutes late faces a fine that could cost them half a day's wages. The overseer's watch is set to factory time, which bears no relation to church bells or public clocks. Factory time runs by its own logic. Designed to extract maximum productivity from every moment of the working day, workers have learned to arrive early, standing in the pre-dawn darkness to ensure they're not docked pay for tardiness. Inside, the assault on your senses is immediate and overwhelming. The noise is so intense that normal conversation is impossible. Workers communicate through hand signals and shouted phrases that have been honed down to essential information only. The cacophony includes the crash of looms, the whir of spinning frames, the hiss of steam engines, and the constant grinding of metal against metal. This industrial symphony never stops, never pauses, never offers a moment of relief from its relentless rhythm. The air is thick with cotton fibers, creating a fine, white dust that coats everything and everyone. Within minutes of entering, your clothes, hair, and skin are covered in a layer of cotton particles that will work their way into your lungs with every breath. The dust creates a hazy atmosphere that makes visibility poor beyond a few feet. Workers often can't see their colleagues just a few machines away, isolated by the industrial fog that surrounds them. The machinery dominates the space, massive mechanical looms and spinning frames that stretch from floor to ceiling. These machines operate at tremendous speed, their metal parts moving with enough force to crush bone if someone gets too close. There are no safety guards, no emergency stops, no protective equipment of any kind. Workers must simply learn to move with fluid precision around these mechanical monsters, knowing that a moment's inattention could result in serious injury or death. The steam engines that power the machinery fill the air with hot, humid vapor that makes breathing difficult and causes clothes to stick to perspiring skin. The heat from these engines, combined with the friction generated by hundreds of moving parts, creates an oppressive atmosphere that would challenge even the healthiest constitution. Workers regularly collapse from heat exhaustion, only to be dragged aside and replaced by someone else. Your workstation is one of dozens arranged in perfect rows throughout the factory floor. The space between machines is minimal, just enough room for a worker to move between them while performing their duties. There's no place to sit, no place to rest, no personal space whatsoever. You and your fellow workers are components in a larger machine, expected to operate with the same mechanical precision as the equipment around you. The spinning frame you'll tend for the next 16 hours stands nearly twice your height, its metal frame blackened with oil and cotton dust. Hundreds of spindles rotate at incredible speed, each one requiring constant attention to maintain proper thread tension and repair breaks. The machine's rhythm becomes hypnotic after hours of work, a mechanical pulse that seems to synchronize with your heartbeat until you feel more machine than human. Your first task of the day is to check the cotton threads running through your assigned spinning frame. Any broken threads must be immediately repaired, and the machine cannot be stopped for maintenance. This means you must perform delicate work while the machinery continues operating at full speed around you. Your hands move with practiced efficiency, but the constant thread of the moving parts requires absolute focus. A momentary lapse in attention could result in fingers being caught in the spinning mechanisms. The cotton you work with comes from slave plantations in America, shipped across the Atlantic to feed England's industrial appetite. You don't think about this connection often. Survival requires focusing on immediate concerns rather than distant moral considerations. But sometimes handling the raw cotton, you can almost feel the ghost of the enslaved hands that picked it, creating a chain of exploitation that stretches from southern plantations to Manchester factories. The overseers patrol the factory floor like prison guards, watching for any sign of slacking or inefficiency. They carry sticks and are not hesitant to use them on workers who appear to be moving too slowly. Talking is forbidden during work hours, not that conversation would be possible over the noise anyway. Even brief conversations during the few sanctioned breaks can result in fines or dismissal. The head overseer is a man named Grimsby, whose reputation for cruelty extends throughout the Manchester factory district. He moves through the factory floor with the predatory grace of someone who enjoys wielding power over desperate people. Workers scatter before him like frightened animals, knowing that attracting his attention rarely leads to anything good. He has favorites among the workers, usually young women who've learned that certain accommodations can mean the difference between employment and starvation. By mid-morning, your body is already showing signs of the strain. Your back aches from standing in one position for hours. Your hands are cramped from performing the same repetitive motions thousands of times. The cotton dust has triggered a coughing fit that you try to suppress, knowing that excessive coughing is seen as a sign of weakness that could cost you your job. The heat inside the factory is stifling. Steam-powered machinery generates enormous amounts of heat, and the brick building traps it like an oven. Windows, when they exist, are kept closed to maintain humidity levels necessary for cotton processing. The combination of heat, humidity, and poor air circulation creates conditions that would be considered torture in any modern context. Fainting is so common that overseers barely acknowledge it unless it interferes with production. Workers who collapse are simply dragged to one side and replaced by someone else until they recover sufficiently to return to work. There's no medical attention, no concern for the workers' well-being, only irritation at the momentary disruption to production schedules. The first break of the day comes after 6 hours of continuous work. You have 15 minutes to eat, drink, and attend to personal needs. The factory provides no food, so workers must bring their own or purchase overpriced items from the company store. Most workers simply step outside for a few minutes of fresh air, though fresh is a relative term in Manchester's polluted atmosphere. The company store is a source of additional exploitation, selling necessities at inflated prices to workers who have no alternative shopping options. A loaf of bread that might cost 6 pence elsewhere sells for 9 pence at the company store. Workers who can't afford to pay cash can charge their purchases against future wages, creating a system of debt that ensures they can never leave their employment. During this brief respite, you get your first clear look at your fellow workers in natural light. What you see is sobering. These are people who've been ground down by the industrial machine they serve. Their faces are pale and drawn, marked by malnutrition and exhaustion. Many have developed a characteristic cough that punctuates their conversations. Others show visible signs of injury from workplace accidents, missing fingers, permanent limps, scars from burns caused by steam or hot machinery. The conversation during break time centers around survival rather than hopes or dreams. Workers share information about which shops might have slightly cheaper bread, which landlords might accept late rent payments, and which factory supervisors are in particularly bad moods. There's little energy left for discussing anything beyond the immediate necessities of getting through another day. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 40s who looks 60, shares news that the price of milk has risen again. Her husband died of lung disease last year, what workers call cotton lung, and she's struggling to support 2 children on a woman's wages. The children, 8 and 10 years old, work in a different section of the factory. Their small fingers ideal for reaching into tight spaces between moving machinery. Old William, despite being only 35, is considered ancient by factory standards. He's worked in textile mills since he was 6 years old, and his body shows every year of that abuse. His spine is permanently curved from decades of bending over machinery, and his hands are twisted into claw-like shapes from repetitive motion injuries. But he's also a repository of survival knowledge, knowing which supervisors can be approached for small favors and which machines are most likely to malfunction. Children during break time don't play games or run around as children should. Instead, they sit quietly, conserving their energy for the remaining hours of work ahead. Many fall asleep standing up, their small bodies simply unable to maintain consciousness after hours of dangerous, demanding labor. The sight of a 6-year-old child nodding off while leaning against a factory wall should shock you. But in 1825 Manchester, it's just another part of daily life. Your own 8-year-old son sits beside you during the break, his small face already bearing the serious expression of someone forced into premature adulthood. He doesn't complain about the heat or the dangerous work. He's learned that complaints only bring unwanted attention from supervisors. Instead, he conserves his energy and focuses on the simple task of survival. One shift at a time, as the break ends and workers file back into the factory, you notice something that would be impossible to ignore in any modern workplace: the accidents. In just the few minutes you've been outside, you can see evidence of the morning's injuries. A woman is wrapping her hand in a dirty cloth, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. A young boy is limping more noticeably than he was earlier, suggesting a new injury to his already damaged leg. These incidents aren't reported or investigated. They're simply accepted as part of the cost of industrial progress. The factory keeps no records of worker injuries, and there's no compensation for those hurt on the job. Workers who become too disabled to continue their duties are simply dismissed, left to fend for themselves or rely on family support that often doesn't exist. The afternoon shift brings its own challenges. As fatigue sets in, the risk of accidents increases dramatically. Workers who've been on their feet for 10 hours begin to make small mistakes that can have catastrophic consequences. The machinery doesn't slow down or become more forgiving as the day progresses. If anything, the heat and humidity make it even more dangerous as metal parts expand and steam pressure builds. A spinning frame 3 stations down from yours suddenly lurches to a stop with a grinding screech of metal. The worker tending it, a young woman named Sarah, has somehow caught her apron in the mechanism. For a terrifying moment, it seems the machine might drag her into its moving parts. Other workers quickly help free her. But the incident serves as a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in this environment. Your lunch break, if you can afford one, consists of whatever food you've managed to bring from home. For most workers, this means another piece of bread and perhaps a small portion of cheese or bacon, if the family budget allows for such luxuries. You eat standing up, there being no place to sit in the factory and insufficient time to leave the premises. Water comes from pumps that draw from the same polluted sources that serve the entire city. The water tastes of chemicals and often contains visible particles, but it's the only option available. Workers have learned to let the water sit for a few minutes before drinking, allowing the heaviest particles to settle to the bottom of their cups. The afternoon heat becomes almost unbearable. The factory's brick walls have absorbed hours of heat from the machinery and steam systems, turning the entire building into an oven. Workers begin to show signs of heat exhaustion. Pale skin, rapid breathing, unsteady movements. Some simply collapse where they stand, their bodies finally surrendering to the impossible demands being placed upon them. Ventilation inside the factory is virtually non-existent. The few windows are kept closed to maintain the humidity levels necessary for cotton processing. This means that the air you're breathing has been recirculated through hundreds of lungs and contaminated with an ever-increasing concentration of cotton dust, chemical vapors, and human exhalation. Each breath becomes more difficult than the last. The social dynamics within the factory reflect the brutal realities of industrial employment. Workers compete against each other for the favor of supervisors, knowing that being labeled a troublemaker or inefficient worker means immediate dismissal and potential blacklisting from other factories. Solidarity exists, but it's tempered by the knowledge that helping a struggling co-worker might draw unwanted attention from management. Children in the factory face unique horrors that would be unthinkable in any modern context. Their job as scavengers requires them to crawl under moving machinery to collect cotton waste and oil the mechanisms. The space beneath the machines is cramped, hot, and filled with moving parts that could easily crush a small body. Children regularly suffer injuries that would be considered serious trauma in any other context, but in the factory, they're expected to continue working unless they're literally unable to move. Your son spends his afternoon crawling beneath the massive spinning frames, his small body disappearing into spaces that would be impossible for an adult to navigate. You try not to watch too closely, knowing that your worry will only make his job more difficult. But every crash and clatter of machinery makes your heart skip a beat, wondering if this will be the moment when the industrial machine claims your child. Women workers face additional challenges beyond the physical demands of factory labor. Sexual harassment from supervisors is common and largely accepted as part of the workplace culture. Women who resist unwanted advances often find themselves assigned to more dangerous positions or subjected to impossible production quotas that serve as pretexts for dismissal. Pregnancy is treated not as a natural condition requiring accommodation, but as a productivity problem to be managed through reduced wages or termination. The piece rate payment system creates additional stress beyond the physical demands of the work. Workers are paid based on their production output, which means that any time lost to injury, illness, or mechanical failure directly reduces their income. This creates enormous pressure to work through pain, hide injuries, and take risks that further endanger their health and safety. A woman at the station next to yours is clearly ill. Her face is flushed with fever, and she sways unsteadily as she works. But taking time off for illness means no pay, and no pay means her children don't eat. So she continues working, spreading her infection to other workers and risking a collapse that could injure her and damage expensive machinery. By late afternoon, the factory floor resembles a battlefield more than a workplace. The air is thick with cotton dust and steam, creating a hazy atmosphere that makes visibility poor beyond a few feet. The noise has become so constant that workers develop a kind of selective hearing, able to distinguish important sounds like supervisory commands or machinery malfunctions from the general industrial din. Your body has now been operating under extreme stress for over 12 hours. Your hands are cramped into claw-like positions from gripping tools and manipulating machinery. Your back screams with pain from hours of bending and reaching. Your lungs burn with each breath as cotton fibers accumulate in your airways. Yet you still have hours of work remaining before the day ends. The cotton dust isn't just uncomfortable, it's deadly. With every breath, you're inhaling fibers that will accumulate in your lungs over time. Mill fever, as workers call it, is a constant companion. The early symptoms include a persistent cough, shortness of breath, and chest tightness. In the advanced stages, workers develop what doctors call cotton lung, a condition that makes breathing increasingly difficult until even simple activities become exhausting. Around you, other workers perform their specialized tasks with the same mechanical precision. Women tend multiple spinning frames simultaneously, moving between them in carefully choreographed patterns to maintain thread tension and repair breaks. Their movements have become so automatic that they seem to operate in a trance-like state, their consciousness retreating from the harsh realities of their physical environment. Men operate the heavier machinery, their bodies bearing the physical toll of wrestling with steam-powered equipment that seems designed to resist human control. The weight of the machinery, combined with the constant vibration and heat, creates muscle strains and joint problems that will plague workers for the rest of their lives, however long those lives might be. The evening shift brings no relief from the heat and humidity, if anything. Conditions worsen as the day's accumulated heat and moisture reach peak levels. Workers begin to move more slowly, their exhausted bodies simply unable to maintain the pace demanded by the machinery. Supervisors respond to this natural human limitation not with understanding, but with increased threats and physical intimidation. Accidents during the evening hours become more frequent and more severe. Exhausted workers lose their grip on tools, slip on surfaces made treacherous by accumulated moisture and cotton dust, and make split-second miscalculations that result in contact with moving machinery. The factory's first aid resources consist of little more than rags for bandaging and alcohol for sterilization, assuming such supplies are available at all. A young man 3 stations away from you suddenly screams in pain. His sleeve has caught in a spinning frame, and the machine has dragged his arm into its mechanism before he could pull free. Workers quickly stop the machine and extract him, but his arm is badly mangled. He's carried outside, leaving a trail of blood on the factory floor. Within minutes, another worker takes his place, and production continues as if nothing has happened. The lighting inside the factory as evening approaches becomes another hazard. Oil lamps and candles provide minimal illumination, creating pools of light separated by areas of deep shadow. Workers must perform intricate tasks while squinting through inadequate lighting, further increasing the risk of accidents and adding eye strain to their already overwhelming list of physical challenges. The shadows cast by the machinery create an eerie, almost supernatural atmosphere as the day progresses. The constant movement of the machines makes the shadows dance and shift, creating optical illusions that can confuse exhausted workers and contribute to accidents. The flickering light from oil lamps makes it difficult to judge distances and speeds, turning routine tasks into dangerous gambles. As the workday finally nears its end, you realize that your experience represents just one day in a life that will consist of thousands of such days. There are no weekends in the factory system. Work continues 7 days a week, with only the briefest breaks for the most essential personal needs. Sunday might bring a slightly shorter shift, but never a complete day of rest. Vacation time is an unknown concept. Sick leave doesn't exist. Workers show up regardless of their physical condition, knowing that absence means not only lost wages, but potential termination. The idea of retirement is laughable. Workers continue until their bodies completely break down, at which point they become dependent on family members or face destitution. The final hours of the shift seem to stretch endlessly. Every muscle in your body aches, every joint protests movement. Every breath is a struggle against the accumulated dust and chemical vapors that have filled your lungs. The machinery continues its relentless rhythm, indifferent to human suffering, demanding the same precision and attention it received when the shift began 16 hours ago. Your son, who started the day as an energetic 8-year-old, now moves like an old man, His small face is gray with exhaustion and cotton dust. His eyes hollow from the strain of constant vigilance around dangerous machinery. He's learned to suppress his natural childhood impulses, the desire to run, play, or simply rest, in favor of the mechanical precision that keeps him alive in this industrial hellscape. When the final bell rings at 8:30 p.m., the sound is almost surreal. After 16 hours of constant noise, the sudden silence feels oppressive. Workers stand for a moment in confusion, their bodies and minds needing time to process the end of the shift. Some have literally forgotten what it feels like to stop working, their consciousness so thoroughly adapted to the demands of industrial labor that rest seems unnatural. The walk home takes you back through the same polluted streets you navigated that morning. But now your exhausted body makes the journey even more difficult. Your legs shake with fatigue, and the weight of your work clothes, now thoroughly saturated with sweat and cotton dust, feels enormous. Other workers shuffle alongside you in the same condition. A procession of human beings pushed beyond their natural limits by the demands of industrial production. The streets seem different in the evening light, or perhaps your perception has been altered by 16 hours of industrial labor. The familiar sights and sounds of the neighborhood take on an almost dreamlike quality, as if you're seeing them through a haze of exhaustion and cotton dust. Children play in the streets, but they seem to belong to a different world, a world where childhood is still possible. Your wife meets you at the door of your tenement, her own face showing the strain of a day spent caring for your youngest children while worrying about your safety and that of your working son. She's managed to prepare a thin soup from scraps and bones, supplemented by a piece of bread that represents a significant portion of the family's daily food budget. Your evening meal, when you finally reach your cramped living quarters, consists of whatever food your family has managed to acquire during your absence. Often this means bread, and perhaps a thin soup made from scraps and bones. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions, if it appears at all. The children have likely eaten little during the day, as food must be carefully rationed to ensure there's something available for the primary wage earner. The soup tastes of grease and poverty, but it's warm and provides some illusion of nourishment. You eat slowly, partly from exhaustion and partly to make the small portion last as long as possible. Your son eats with the same deliberate pace, his small body desperately needing nutrition to fuel another day of dangerous labor. The few hours between returning home and falling asleep are supposed to represent your personal time, but exhaustion makes any meaningful activity impossible. You're too tired to engage with your family, too physically depleted to pursue hobbies or interests, too mentally drained to contemplate anything beyond the basic necessities of survival. These evening hours pass in a haze of fatigue punctuated only by the persistent cough that has become your constant companion. Your youngest child, the 3-year-old with the persistent cough, crawls onto your lap as you sit by the single candle that lights your room. Her small body feels fragile against your work-hardened frame, a reminder of the innocence and vulnerability that your own childhood never included. You know that in a few years, she too will join the family's workforce. Her childhood sacrificed to economic necessity. The walls of your room seem to close in as evening progresses. The space that houses your entire family is smaller than the closets in middle-class homes, but it represents a significant portion of your income. Rent consumes nearly half of your wages, leaving little for food, clothing, and the other necessities of life. Yet you are fortunate to have housing at all. Many factory families share single rooms with multiple other families, or sleep in hallways and basements. Sleep, when it finally comes, offers little respite from the day's trauma. The cramped sleeping conditions mean that rest is fitful and interrupted. The sounds of the factory continue to echo in your dreams, and your body aches from the accumulated damage of repetitive motion and physical stress. Morning will arrive with the same jarring bell that started today's ordeal, and the cycle will begin again. The dreams that come in your brief periods of unconsciousness are filled with the rhythms and sounds of the factory. Your subconscious mind continues to operate machinery, repair broken threads, and navigate the dangers of the industrial workplace, even in sleep. There's no escape from the mechanical rhythms that have become the soundtrack of your existence. Outside your window, the city never truly sleeps. Other factories operate around the clock, their steam engines and machinery creating a constant background hum that becomes the heartbeat of industrial civilization. The sky glows with the light of coal fires and industrial processes, turning night into a perpetual twilight that knows no natural rhythm. The cumulative effects of factory work become apparent over weeks and months rather than days. Workers develop a characteristic appearance that marks them as clearly as any uniform. Their posture becomes permanently stooped from hours of bending over machinery. Their hands develop calluses and deformities from gripping tools and manipulating equipment. Their skin takes on a grayish pallor from lack of sunlight and constant exposure to industrial pollutants. Respiratory problems become universal among factory workers. The combination of cotton dust, chemical vapors, and poor air quality creates lung conditions that progressively worsen over time. What begins as a simple cough evolves into increasingly severe breathing difficulties that eventually make even moderate physical activity exhausting. Workers in their 30s often have the lung capacity of elderly individuals, their respiratory systems destroyed by years of industrial exposure. The social isolation of factory work compounds its physical toll. The noise levels make conversation impossible during work hours, and the exhaustion that follows makes social interaction difficult during personal time. Workers become isolated from their communities and even from their own families, their lives consumed entirely by the demands of industrial production. Economic insecurity adds another layer of stress to the factory worker's existence. Wages are barely sufficient to cover basic necessities, and any interruption in income, whether from injury, illness, or economic downturns, threatens immediate destitution. Workers live constantly on the edge of poverty, never more than a few missed paychecks away from homelessness and starvation. The factory system's impact on family life is particularly devastating. Parents work such long hours that they have virtually no time to spend with their children. Children begin working at ages that should be devoted to play and education. Their childhood sacrificed to the family's economic survival. Family meals become rare luxuries, as work schedules rarely align to allow the entire family to eat together. Sunday, the supposed day of rest, brings only slightly reduced work schedules rather than genuine leisure time. Many factories operate 7 days a week, giving workers perhaps a few hours off for church attendance, not out of religious conviction, but because public pressure demands some acknowledgement of Christian observance. Even when factories close on Sundays, workers often spend the day in other forms of labor, washing clothes, repairing their few possessions, or seeking additional employment to supplement their meager incomes. The church itself becomes another source of social control rather than spiritual comfort. Ministers preach sermons about the virtue of hard work and the dangers of questioning social hierarchy. Workers are told that their suffering is divinely ordained, and that resistance to employer authority constitutes rebellion against God's plan. This religious justification for industrial exploitation helps maintain social stability, while workers endure conditions that would otherwise provoke widespread revolt. Marriage and relationships suffer under the strain of industrial employment. Couples have little time to spend together, and the physical and emotional exhaustion of factory work leaves little energy for maintaining personal relationships. Domestic violence increases as workers, frustrated by their powerlessness in the workplace, take out their anger on family members who are even more vulnerable than themselves. Courtship and romance become almost impossible luxuries for factory workers. Young people have no time or energy for the social activities that might lead to relationships, and no resources for the expenses associated with courtship. Marriages become primarily economic arrangements rather than romantic partnerships, as survival takes precedence over personal fulfillment. Children in factory families grow up without adequate parental supervision or guidance, as both parents work long hours outside the home. These children often raise themselves and their younger siblings, missing crucial developmental experiences that would prepare them for healthy adult relationships. The cycle of industrial poverty becomes self-perpetuating as each generation lacks the resources and knowledge needed to improve their circumstances. The education system, such as it exists, is designed to produce compliant industrial workers rather than critical thinkers. Children who don't enter factory work at young ages may attend schools that emphasize discipline, obedience, and basic literacy skills needed for industrial employment. Higher education remains the exclusive province of the wealthy, ensuring that working-class children cannot escape their social position through learning. Medical care for factory workers is virtually non-existent. Company doctors, when available,
are primarily concerned with determining whether workers are fit to continue employment rather than providing genuine health care.
Industrial injuries and occupational diseases are treated as personal failings rather than workplace hazards requiring systematic address. Workers who become too disabled to continue employment are simply discarded without compensation or support.
The few medical remedies available to workers are often more dangerous than the conditions they're meant to treat.
Patent medicines contain dangerous substances like mercury, arsenic, and opium, sold by traveling salesmen who prey on desperate people seeking relief from industrial ailments. Home remedies passed down through families often involve herbs and substances that may provide some comfort, but can do little to address the systematic destruction of human health that industrial employment creates. Pregnancy and childbirth present particular dangers for factory women. Poor nutrition, exposure to industrial chemicals, and the physical demands of factory work lead to high rates of miscarriage and infant mortality. Women who do carry pregnancies to term often give birth to children who show signs of developmental problems that may be linked to their mother's workplace exposures. The few women who survive childbirth often return to work within days, their economic desperation overriding any consideration of recovery time. The housing available to factory workers reflects their economic status and social power. Entire families crowd into single rooms in buildings that lack basic sanitation, clean water, or adequate ventilation. These overcrowded conditions contribute to the spread of infectious diseases that claim thousands of lives annually. Landlords have no incentive to maintain decent housing for tenants who have no alternative options and no political power to demand better treatment. Sanitation in working-class neighborhoods is essentially non-existent. Human waste is often disposed of in open pits or simply thrown into the streets, creating breeding grounds for disease. The water supply comes from wells that are often contaminated with sewage and industrial runoff. Garbage accumulates in streets and courtyards, attracting rats and other vermin that spread disease throughout the community. The contrast between rich and poor neighborhoods in industrial cities like Manchester is stark and deliberate. Factory owners and investors live in suburban mansions with clean air, running water, and beautiful gardens, while their employees are crowded into urban slums that resemble medieval plague quarters. This geographic separation allows the wealthy to enjoy the profits of industrial production while remaining insulated from its human costs. Food adulteration becomes a serious problem as merchants seek to maximize profits from the limited purchasing power of factory workers. Bread is mixed with alum and other chemicals to increase weight and improve appearance. Milk is watered down and contaminated with substances that can cause serious illness. Tea and coffee are often mixed with used leaves and grounds, providing little nutritional value while maintaining the appearance of genuine products. The diet available to factory workers is not only inadequate in quantity but also lacking in essential nutrients. Fresh fruits and vegetables are luxuries that few families can afford. Meat appears on working-class tables only rarely, usually in the form of scraps and organ meats that middle-class families would consider unfit for consumption. This chronic malnutrition contributes to a wide range of health problems that make workers more susceptible to industrial accidents and occupational diseases. The seasonal cycles that had governed human life for millennia are completely disrupted by industrial employment. Workers lose connection with natural rhythms as they spend their days in windowless factories and their nights in urban environments where natural light is obscured by pollution. This disconnection from seasonal cycles contributes to both physical and psychological health problems that affect entire populations. The factory work schedule recognizes no natural rhythms or human needs. Workers labor the same hours regardless of weather, season, or personal circumstances. The machinery demands constant attention, and the competitive pressures of industrial production allow no accommodation for human limitations. Workers learn to suppress their natural responses to fatigue, illness, and emotional stress in favor of the mechanical precision demanded by their employers. Transportation systems develop primarily to serve industrial needs rather than human comfort or convenience. Workers walk long distances to reach factories, often through dangerous or unhealthy environments. The few roads and bridges are designed for moving raw materials and finished goods rather than accommodating pedestrian traffic. Public transportation, when available, is overcrowded and unreliable. With schedules that prioritize commercial rather than human needs, The cultural life of factory workers becomes severely impoverished, as exhaustion and poverty eliminate opportunities for artistic expression, entertainment or intellectual development. Traditional forms of community entertainment, festivals, storytelling, music making, disappear as work schedules make communal activities impossible. The rich cultural traditions that had sustained communities for generations are lost within a single lifetime. Books and newspapers are luxuries that few workers can afford, and literacy rates among the working class remain low. Even those who can read have little time or energy for such activities after 16 hours of factory labor. The intellectual impoverishment of the working class serves the interests of factory owners, who prefer employees who don't question their circumstances or organize for better treatment. Alcohol consumption increases dramatically among factory workers as one of the few available escapes from the misery of industrial employment. Gin shops and alehouses cluster around factory districts, providing temporary relief from physical pain and emotional despair. However, this coping mechanism often creates additional problems, including domestic violence, workplace accidents, and further deterioration of already marginal economic circumstances. The temperance movement that emerges during this period often blames workers for their drinking rather than addressing the conditions that drive them to seek chemical escape. Middle-class reformers preach about the evils of alcohol while ignoring the industrial system that makes such escape seem necessary. This moral blame serves to distract attention from the systematic causes of working-class suffering. Crime rates increase in industrial areas as traditional social controls break down and economic desperation drives people to illegal activities. Theft, prostitution, and violence become common survival strategies for people who have been pushed beyond the limits of legal employment. However, the criminal justice system focuses on punishment rather than addressing the social conditions that create crime. Workers who steal food to feed their families face the same legal consequences as professional criminals, while employers who create dangerous working conditions face no legal accountability whatsoever. The law serves to protect property rights and industrial profits rather than human welfare, creating a system of justice that criminalizes poverty while protecting exploitation. The political system remains dominated by industrial and agricultural elites who have no direct experience of factory conditions. Workers have no political representation and no legal means of influencing the policies that govern their lives. The emerging labor movement must overcome not only employer resistance, but active government hostility to achieve even minimal improvements in working conditions. Voting rights are restricted to property owners, effectively excluding the entire working class from political participation. This ensures that government policies serve the interests of capital rather than labor, creating a legal framework that facilitates rather than restricts industrial exploitation. Workers who attempt to organize for political change face imprisonment, blacklisting, and violence from both employers and government authorities. Gender relationships are profoundly altered by industrial employment, as traditional family structures prove incompatible with factory schedules. Women often earn independent incomes for the first time, but this economic freedom comes at the cost of exhausting double duty as they continue to bear primary responsibility for domestic work, while also performing industrial labor. Men lose their traditional role as sole family providers, while gaining no corresponding relief from social expectations of masculine dominance. This creates tensions within families as economic necessity forces changes in gender roles without corresponding changes in social attitudes. Children often become economic assets rather than objects of parental care, their value measured by their potential contribution to family income rather than their individual needs or development. The few women who work in factories while pregnant face impossible choices between their own health and their family's economic survival. Factory work during pregnancy often leads to miscarriage or birth defects, but taking time off for prenatal care means lost wages that the family cannot afford. Women often work until they go into labor, sometimes giving birth in factory housing before returning to work within days. Sexual harassment and exploitation of women workers is systematic and largely ignored by authorities. Supervisors routinely demand sexual favors in exchange for job security or better working conditions. Women who refuse such demands often find themselves dismissed or assigned to the most dangerous positions in the factory. This sexual exploitation is treated as a private matter rather than a workplace safety issue requiring intervention. Children in factory families grow up without childhood in any meaningful sense. They transition directly from infancy to industrial labor, their physical and emotional development shaped entirely by the demands of production rather than natural human growth patterns. Play, education, and family bonding become luxuries that interfere with economic productivity. The technical innovations that drive industrial development often make working conditions worse rather than better for ordinary workers. New machinery may increase productivity, but it also increases the pace of work and the risk of accidents. Steam power eliminates some forms of physical labor while creating new hazards from high-pressure systems and extreme heat. Progress for factory owners means increased suffering for factory workers. Machine design prioritizes efficiency and profit over human safety and comfort. Equipment is built to maximize output with no consideration for the workers who must operate it. Safety features that might prevent accidents are eliminated as unnecessary expenses that reduce profitability. The result is machinery that seems designed to injure or kill the people who work with it. International trade relationships develop that depend on maintaining low labor costs in industrial centers like Manchester. The cotton processed in English factories comes from slave plantations in America, shipped across the Atlantic to feed England's industrial appetite. This creates a global system of exploitation that connects the suffering of English workers with the brutality of American slavery. The profits from this international trade flow upward to investors and factory owners while the costs are borne by enslaved Africans, displaced Native Americans, and exploited English workers. This global system of exploitation becomes the foundation for modern capitalism, creating wealth for some through the systematic impoverishment and suffering of many. The environmental consequences of industrial production extend far beyond immediate factory locations. Rivers become contaminated with chemical waste, making water unfit for human consumption or agricultural use. The River Irwell, which flows through Manchester, becomes so polluted that fish cannot survive in its waters, and the smell of industrial chemicals makes it dangerous for humans to approach. Air pollution travels great distances, affecting rural areas that have no direct connection to industrial production. Coal consumption required for steam power contributes to deforestation and landscape degradation that will take generations to reverse. The very air becomes a carrier of industrial toxins, making respiratory disease a fact of life for entire regional populations. The noise pollution from industrial machinery creates another form of environmental degradation that affects entire communities. The constant sound of steam engines, machinery, and industrial processes makes normal conversation difficult even outside factory walls. Children grow up in environments where the sounds of nature are completely overwhelmed by industrial noise, creating psychological impacts that are only beginning to be understood. As winter approaches, the challenges of factory life intensify. The buildings provide little insulation against cold weather, and heating is minimal due to fire hazards and expense. Workers must dress in layers while still maintaining the mobility needed for industrial tasks. The combination of cold air outside and overheated factory conditions creates thermal shock that contributes to respiratory problems. Food becomes even scarcer during winter months as transportation difficulties increase prices and limit availability. Families that struggle to feed themselves during summer months face potential starvation during winter. The increased caloric needs created by cold weather coincide with reduced food availability, creating nutritional crises that weaken workers' resistance to disease and injury. Seasonal illnesses like influenza and pneumonia become deadly threats to populations already weakened by malnutrition and industrial exposure. What might be minor illnesses for well-fed people become fatal diseases for factory workers whose immune systems have been compromised by their working conditions. Entire families can be wiped out by diseases that healthy populations would survive. The psychological impact of factory work becomes more apparent during the darker months of winter. The combination of reduced daylight, increased physical stress, and continued industrial exposure creates depression and despair that affects entire communities. Suicide rates increase among factory workers during winter months, though such deaths are often attributed to accidents rather than desperation. Spring brings little relief from the accumulated damage of winter factory work. Workers who have survived the cold months often find their health permanently compromised by the experience. Respiratory problems that developed during winter often persist year-round, creating chronic conditions that make workers more vulnerable to future industrial hazards. The cycle of seasons, which should provide natural rhythms of rest and renewal, becomes instead a series of different challenges and dangers for factory workers. Summer brings heat exhaustion and air pollution. Autumn brings increased work demands to prepare for winter. Winter brings cold and starvation. And spring brings only the prospect of repeating the entire cycle once again. As you finally drift towards sleep in your uncomfortable bed, your body still aching from the day's labors, you might reflect on the enormous gap between the promise of industrial progress and the reality of industrial employment. The machines that were supposed to make human life easier have instead made it more difficult and dangerous. The wealth that industrial production generates flows upward to factory owners and investors, while workers become poorer and more miserable. Yet even in these dire circumstances, human resilience and solidarity persist. Workers develop informal networks of mutual support that help them survive conditions that would otherwise be unbearable. They share resources, knowledge, and emotional support in ways that preserve their humanity, despite the dehumanizing nature of industrial employment. Neighbors look after each other's children when parents are working. Sharing the burden of childcare in communities where traditional family structures have been destroyed by industrial demands. Workers who have mastered particular skills teach them to newcomers, creating informal education systems that help people survive in dangerous industrial environments. Small acts of kindness become enormously important in a world where human warmth is systematically eliminated by industrial efficiency. A shared piece of bread, a helping hand during illness, or simply a moment of human recognition can provide the emotional sustenance needed to continue surviving impossible conditions. They begin to organize collectively to demand better treatment, laying the foundation for labor movements that will eventually improve working conditions for future generations. Secret meetings in workers' homes or hidden corners of factories become the birthplace of unions and political organizations that will challenge the absolute power of industrial capital. These early organizing efforts face severe repression from employers and government authorities who view worker solidarity as a threat to the established order. Workers who participate in organizing activities risk not only their jobs, but potential imprisonment or violence. Yet the drive for human dignity and decent treatment proves stronger than fear, creating movements that will eventually transform industrial society. The story of the English factory worker in 1825 is ultimately a story about the price of progress. The comfortable modern world we inhabit was built on the backs of people who sacrificed their health, their family relationships, their cultural traditions, and often their lives to create the industrial foundation of contemporary prosperity. Their suffering was not an unfortunate side effect of industrial development. It was an essential component of a system designed to maximize profits by minimizing labor costs. The wealth accumulated by factory owners and investors came directly from the unpaid labor and uncompensated suffering of working people who had no choice but to accept whatever conditions were offered. Understanding this history helps us appreciate not only the material comforts we often take for granted, but also the ongoing struggles of workers around the world who continue to face similar conditions in the name of economic development. The fundamental tension between human needs and industrial efficiency that characterized early English factories persists in different forms throughout the global economy. The cotton dust settles gradually in your lungs as sleep finally takes hold, your breathing becoming slower and deeper, despite the accumulated damage from industrial pollutants. Your dreams, when they come, are filled with the sounds and sensations of the factory, the constant clatter of machinery, the heat and humidity of the work floor, the faces of fellow workers pushed beyond their natural limits. But there's also something else in those dreams. The knowledge that human beings are capable of enduring extraordinary hardship while maintaining their essential humanity. The factory workers of 1825 England were not just victims of an industrial system. They were also agents of historical change who laid the groundwork for labor rights, workplace safety regulations, and social programs that would benefit countless future generations. Their struggles created the possibility for the 8-hour workday, workplace safety regulations, child labor laws, and social insurance programs that protect modern workers. Their sacrifices made possible the labor unions that give contemporary workers collective bargaining power and political representation that was unimaginable in 1825. The story of their resistance and survival provides inspiration for ongoing struggles for social justice and human dignity. Every improvement in working conditions, every expansion of human rights, every step toward economic equality builds on the foundation they created through their suffering and their refusal to accept that suffering as inevitable. As consciousness fades and your modern comfortable bed receives your relaxed body, the distance between 1825 and today becomes less important than the continuity of human experience that connects you to those long-ago workers. Their struggles and sacrifices made possible the world you inhabit. Just as your own struggles and choices will shape the world inherited by future generations, the factory bell that will wake you tomorrow morning in 1825 is silent now, replaced by the gentle rhythm of your own breathing and the soft sounds of a world where child labor laws, workplace safety regulations, and labor unions have transformed the relationship between workers and employers. The cotton dust clears from your lungs as clean air fills your respiratory system, carrying away the accumulated pollutants of a working day that exists now only in historical memory. The aches and pains of industrial labor fade from your muscles, replaced by the comfortable relaxation of someone whose work is meaningful and whose rest is restorative. Sleep comes finally, deeply, and peacefully, a luxury that the exhausted factory workers of industrial England could rarely afford. And a reminder of how far human society has traveled since those dark days when progress was measured primarily in terms of production output rather than human well-being. In your dreams, the voices of those long-ago workers whisper their stories across the centuries, reminding you that the freedoms and comforts you enjoy were purchased with their blood, sweat, and tears. Their legacy lives on in every labor law, every safety regulation, every social program that protects human dignity against the pure logic of economic exploitation, and as sleep finally claims you completely, carrying you away from the harsh realities of 1825 Manchester into the gentle realm of dreams. You carry with you the knowledge that progress is not inevitable, that human dignity must be constantly defended, and that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance against those who would sacrifice human welfare for private profit. The soft sounds of your modern world, the hum of clean machinery, the whisper of climate control, the distant sounds of traffic regulated by safety laws, create a lullaby that would seem impossibly luxurious to those factory workers whose suffering made it all possible. In their honor, and in hope for an even better future, you drift into peaceful sleep, grateful for their sacrifices and determined to prove worthy of their legacy.